All right, welcome to another episode of the Startup Junkies Podcast. So thank you for listening, taking time out of your day to join us for a conversation on entrepreneurship. We appreciate you. This is Caleb Talley, Director of Marketing at Startup Junkie. I'm joined by my co-host, Jeff Amerine, Founder and Managing Director at Startup Junkie.
Hey, Caleb. Glad to be here.
And we are pleased to have with us today Lynn Butterfield, who is a nationally recognized expert in equity capital and investing services. He's been a resource for and quoted in organizations such as Newsweek, ABC News. He's worked with emerging and expanding companies from Silicon Valley to Wall Street, China to the Middle East for the past 25 years, where he's developed his global expertise in business development and expansion. We're so glad to have you. And also, we might add, a new Northwest Arkansas resident.
It's a pleasure for me to be here and a real pleasure for me to live in this great community now.
Awesome. Well, I have to ask you, what brought you to Northwest Arkansas?
Well, really two things. The first thing was that I have three daughters and two of them are still in New York City. And one is here in Northwest Arkansas, and she has all of my grandkids. So we have been coming back and forth for about 7 years, and the community was just so welcoming and so vibrant. My wife and I woke up one day and said, why don't we go live in that community with great people? And so we did. We moved here right before Christmas at the end of December, and have been kind of getting our feet underneath us. And we've enjoyed it right up until the time it was 20 degrees below zero.
Yeah, I was getting ready to move then too.
That's a little more like Rocky Mountain or North Dakota weather. It's not supposed to happen here.
Well, it was very eye-opening when one of my clients was in Chicago and she told me, yeah, it's very cold here. It's 10 degrees. And I said, that's nothing.
Yeah.
Well, Lynn, go ahead, Caleb.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, you've got this really interesting background. You spent time in real estate. You've been involved in as an equity investor. Give us more of the kind of high points. You've got a very interesting road that you've followed in your career, and give us a little more of your story.
Well, I was managing a trading company in the Middle East right before the Gulf War. And we were distributing high voltage cables and new generation rust inhibitors throughout the Gulf region. And we were doing very well with that, and did so right up until the time when Saddam invaded Kuwait. And so those were really interesting days. And I would drive around because of my home was in Riyadh, and we were doing work on the Gulf. And so I would drive my car from Riyadh to the Gulf with a box of water in the back and a shortwave radio, listening to Voice of America to see how close the war was. And finally, when Scud missiles were exploding over Riyadh, I decided it was time for me to leave, because I had a young family then, and I got a flight out to Cairo and flew to Germany, and then back to the United States, and left everything, with the exception of the clothes I was wearing. So I had a huge awakening then. And one of the things I noticed when I was in the Middle East was how hard the government of Saudi Arabia in particular was trying to diversify their economy. As you know, their economy is oil-based, and they were working really hard to start new companies and build businesses there. So when I came back to the United States, I got involved in starting a new company, and enjoyed the process so much. And my experience with what was then Wayne Brown Institute and what is today venturecapital.org, really loved about my experience there in starting out was the idea that we could improve the human condition through technical entrepreneurship. And the story is a very interesting one because Wayne Brown was a professor of engineering at the University of Utah and was a very successful entrepreneur in his own right. And he had graduated from Stanford. And he was there in the early days when Stanford created their first innovation center and really the first research park in the world. And he saw Hewlett Packard, for example, be formed and put up their buildings and be successful there in the Stanford Research Park. And other people were also beginning to be successful because what Wayne did is he started the first research park in Utah and the one at the University of Utah. And he worked with entrepreneurs such as David Evans, who formed his company there. And that really was the genesis. I mean, in those days, there was no venture capital in Utah. And they had to literally go begging and knocking on doors in Silicon Valley, hoping to raise equity capital. And so that was the beginning of an effort to reshape the economy in Utah, change it from a mining and agricultural base to a technology base. And today, you know, you look back and things have changed. I mean, per capita, Utah has either the first or second greatest amount of venture capital in the country. And perhaps more important, we hit the tipping point where people actually want to move there, and we have the talent there to grow companies, because in the early days, no one wanted to relocate there. And when you started a company, you couldn't get the talent. So we had a problem of bridging the gap from startup to companies scaling and becoming successful because they got to a point and then they had to leave the state so that they could hire the talent necessary to go to the next level. So with all of that, we believed at the time when we started in about 1983 to today, we believed that entrepreneurship could be taught and that the knowledge base could be transferred from successful people, not just entrepreneurs, but from the attorneys and accountants that work with them. That knowledge and really the network could be transferred from those individuals to help people start companies. And we proved that over a 30-year period. And it's really gratifying to see how we were able to prove those theories over that period of time. So, you know, I'm a believer that can be done, but it takes not just one or two people, it takes a whole community that sees that vision and begins to move forward very deliberately and very carefully to reach that goal.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great story, and to hear you tell it, it reminds me of something that Brad Feld pulls out in what he says in startup communities. And it's things that we talk about in the Creating Startup Junkies book we've written about how to do these sustainable venture ecosystems in unexpected places. It's a 30+ year march. You know, people say, well, are you going to be the next Silicon Valley? And I was like, I don't know, ask me in 75 years, because you know, Major General Draper came back in 1946 after running the Marshall Plan, and you had Fairchild Semiconductor, and all those things began to come together, but it wasn't overnight. It was a very long march before that started to get the kind of momentum that was needed. And it's the same is true. Salt Lake City is constantly, that area is constantly called out as being one of the bright spots for venture activity, venture capital, high quality people, great software development talent. And it wasn't magic. It was a lot of intentional effort over a long period of time that made it happen. And hearing you tell it brings it to life to actually have somebody that was in the mix there. We've been at this for 13 years here, and we still have a long way to go. Lots happened, because it was definitely kind of a wasteland with not a lot of startup activity in the early 2000s, and it's not now. I mean, there's a real ecosystem here. But I appreciated your telling that story, because I think it's inspirational that it can happen in places that people don't expect.
And the truth is, we have all the necessary ingredients here in Northwest Arkansas, starting with the University of Arkansas. And a lot of times people don't understand the importance of having a very great research university in the backyard. You know, people who aren't involved in that ecosystem think that those universities are nothing but a breeding ground of socialism, or they're lazy people, and why are we spending all of our tax money to support them? And the reality is, if the university is focused right and they believe in this process, they are the basis with which the community can move forward and be successful.
No question about it. Couldn't agree more. And it needs to be a mix of basic and applied research, and more than anything else, just having a 28,000 potential entrepreneurs as students makes a difference. The law of large numbers, bright young people that don't know that what they're about to undertake is not possible is part of it, because they figure out a way to do it typically.
That's really true. And what we created was the concept of the cooperative venturing network. And that's adding to that base the strong experience and wisdom of the private sector. And those entrepreneurs could not afford to have the help from the marketing people and the attorneys and the accountants and all those people at that early stage. But when those private sector people get in the mix and invest their time, experience, and effort, it makes all the difference. Because what I say to entrepreneurs is, money's important, make no doubt about it. It's very important, but what's more important than the money is the network that has the access to capital. So that process of everyone working together is that network. But the important part of that network is, and this has been a real challenge in today's environment, it's the important thing is sitting around a table and getting to know each other. And so I can sit across the table from an entrepreneur and listen to the way she answers the questions, watch the way she thinks, and get to know how she makes decisions. And at the same time, she gets to watch these professionals, and she gets to see how they think and how they react, and if she can work with them. So that's really important. And I say it's difficult today because, you know, all of those face-to-face meetings have changed, and they're now not across the table, they're across the computer screen. And in my mind, that's a little bit challenging. You know, this was brought graphically to my mind one time when I got a call from an entrepreneur at the University of Utah. And he's the real, I don't know, you guys are probably not old enough to remember the television series Doogie Howser.
I'm plenty old enough to remember.
Okay.
I think I have kids that remember that one.
For those of you who are not old enough, Doogie Howser became an MD when he was like 14 or 16 years old. And this physician was that guy, but he was an eye specialist, and he actually invented an installable ring that fits in the eye and automatically delivers medication to the eye after cataract surgery. So all of the hassle and difficulty with putting eye drops in after surgery would go away. And so we worked with him in preparing him to raise capital. And we were sitting in, and I'm not going to mention the name of the law firm, but we had been sitting for weeks in the conference room of one of the top 10 M&A law firms in the United States, going through all of his stuff and helping him. So I get a call from this entrepreneur after we'd been through all that process, and he says to me, "Lynn, could you introduce me to a good law firm?" And I was dead silent on the phone, because he had been sitting at the table with this great law firm with a Harvard trained attorney who introduction. So I said, "Sure, I can do that for you." I called the attorney and I said, "David, could you put me on the schedule. We'll go up to the Moran Eye Center at the University of Utah, and I'd like to make this introduction for you. I know that you've already met him, but for whatever reason, he doesn't remember. So we drove up there together and we sat down and I made the introduction, and all of a sudden that relationship then clicked and they went on from there. But that was so instructive about the importance of building relationships and the importance of that network and integrating people into that network and really teaching them the importance of that network and how to make it work for them.
If you were to, I guess, say diagnose might not be the right word, but, being a new resident to Northwest Arkansas, but you've visited a number of times, how would you compare it to, Utah 20, 30 years ago? I mean, how do those two correlate?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question. So what I have noticed more than anything else, and I'm just going to tell you this little story that happened to me about a week and a half ago. I was at the square in Bentonville talking with a gentleman, and I said to him, so tell me about this bicycle thing, because there's bicycles everywhere. And he says, well, that's a pretty interesting story, because the Waltons decided, and the philanthropic group associated with Walmart decided that they were going to make Northwest Arkansas the mountain biking capital of the world. Now realize I'm from Utah, okay? And so Moab is in Utah. And so I'm kind of snickering, quietly to myself saying, well, that's not ever gonna happen, right? But he says, it really is the biking capital of the world now. And that can be disputed. But he went to the outdoor retailers convention about 10 years ago, which used to be held in Salt Lake City. So these are outdoor retailers that come from all over the world and market their wares. So the head of the Walmart philanthropic group got up boldly 10 years ago and said, we are going to do this. And of course, everyone just laughed in his face and said, well, that's never going to happen. And he looked at them and he says, there are two things that are important in accomplishing this. The first one is having the terrain. We have the terrain. And he says, but the second one is that we have the money. We have unlimited funds to make this happen. So when Bentonville made the announcement, I believe it was either in December or January, that they had reached this goal. And they outlined all the things that had happened. One of which, by the way, is the ability to actually ride a bicycle from North Bella Vista, all the way through South Fayetteville. That's an amazing accomplishment. And they were able to do that because of those resources. So I kind of sat back and I said, oh my gosh, look at the financial base that's already here in town. You've got the Walmart people, you've got the JB Hunt people, you've got the Tyson people. And I'm so new here, I don't know everybody else, but we didn't have those resources in Utah. There were no Fortune 500 companies in Utah in those days. We had one for a brief moment where we had American Stores make their headquarters in Salt Lake City. They built a big, beautiful tower. And then literally 2 months after they finished the tower, left the state because they had been purchased. So we didn't have any of those advantages. So you take those advantages along with a young, vibrant, well-educated group of people with a major research university, and boy, you have everything that it takes. If you're making a pie and you have all the great ingredients, it can be a great pie with the right chef. But if you don't have all the great ingredients and you have a great chef, you can't make a good pie. But we have everything here in Northwest Arkansas. What an opportunity.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And I would say the other interesting, we think about these venture ecosystems, we think about four important pillars. You have to have the talent. The university plays to that. The professional talent that comes out of the big three play to that. You have to have the capital, and it's a funding continuum from the earliest stage all the way through private equity. We're working on that. There's still gaps. You have to have this regular drumbeat of entrepreneurial culture. People have to believe it's important. They have to show up for events. They have to be willing to mentor. They have to join angel investment groups. And then you have to have this important engagement aspect that includes the flagship enterprises. They have to believe it's not competition for talent. That's actually where the source of their competitive advantage is going to come in the future. That's one of those engagement pieces, and there's others. It's the community and it's institutions like the university. But if you get the flagships believing it, then some real magic can happen, because you've got this built-in customer base where they see open innovation and startup scene is not competition for talent, but the way they're going to maintain their competitive edge. And we're now getting to that point where all of the big three and the suppliers that are around them are playing kind of an active role, more active now than they ever have. And I think we're on the cusp of this place really starting to pop. We get compared to Austin a lot, and there's aspects of Austin that we don't want to emulate, truthfully.
Sure.
But Austin now looks a lot like LA, but we want to take the goodness that's come out of that startup scene there and the things that we've seen in Salt Lake and create an NWA that's ranked and recognized and the kind of place that people want to be.
And it's so beautiful because we have the ability to take a look and see what's happened to other places, like you said, with Austin and Salt Lake or Silicon Valley, wherever it is, and build our own future and create it. It's a lot easier to build it right from the beginning than it is to go back and correct the problems in the future. So that is what you've described is exactly right, and it's really exciting. And then the next phase, once we get some companies that are successful, is that the people who worked for those companies get it. They live it, they breathe it, they understand it, and they become serial entrepreneurs and they start new ventures. And then the ball really starts rolling much faster and much larger.
And now that you're plugged in here in Northwest Arkansas with all these ingredients coming together, what's your timeline? Like, what is your plan? How do you plan to plug in, and what do you want to do?
Well, what I really want to do is do exactly what we've described. I want to spend my time helping early entrepreneurs and mentor them and help build that cooperative venturing network. That's the role that I can see myself filling. And the exciting thing for me is that I still have, the network in New York. So when I meet the right people, I can pick up the phone and say, hey, this is something you need to take a look at. And that's the difference. We used to talk about throwing business plans over the transom, which is, if people don't know what a transom is, it's the window above a door.
Yeah.
Where you just throw it there and hope that someone picks it up and reads it. And that's not what makes you successful. What makes you successful is when somebody has those relationships and they pick up the phone and they say, hey, I have been involved in this company. I believe in them. Will you take a look at this? And that is where the real magic starts to happen.
Well, count on getting pulled into the swamp with us. I mean, now that we're knowing you're here, you can't hide. We'll find you, and we're glad to have you here, because this is one of those things where, it's like a rolling snowball, and we've been pushing it down the hill, and it's starting to pick up momentum. And as more great people with the diversity of experiences and backgrounds and connections come into that picture, it just gets stronger and stronger as it rolls down the hill. So I speak for the whole group, maybe the whole region. We're really glad you're here, and you won't be lonely. We'll make sure of that.
Well, thank you. It's going to be my pleasure to engage with everybody. I have never in my life met a greater group of people than reside here.
That is maybe part of the unfair competitive advantage that this place has that a lot of people don't realize is there's lots of places you can go where people are like, where are you from? Why are you here? Kind of rough elbows and it's harsh. I know the time I spent in the Mid-Atlantic was a lot like that. But that's not the place. The DNA here is, man, we're glad you're here. What can we do for you? How can we make this the greatest experience ever? And how can we help you really get in the mix? And I think you'll see that more and more.
Well, I have
ahead.
seen that. And what's really disappointing to me is that with all of the growth, population growth in Utah, there's been a very negative backlash against that. And I just have been shaking my head now for the last almost 10 years saying, what are you people doing? Do you not realize that the greatest resource on this planet is good people? And you're pushing them away? Are you crazy? And that's not been my experience here. It has been a very welcoming, open-armed welcome for me, and I'm grateful for that.
I'm going to say that's a sense I get when in working with entrepreneurs too. You'd think, in some places they'd be competitive with one another, but there's so many that's so willing to really plug in and kind of lend their knowledge on certain things that they've experienced, that they're willing to help another entrepreneur who could be, eventually a competitor down the line to just help kind of lift up.
There's enough resource here, human and capital resource for everyone. And we can continue to grow that so we don't have to compete with each other.
Lynn, this is typically the spot where we try to land the plane. It's been an engaging conversation, obviously. If you were to roll the clock back before you spent that time with the cooperative venturing approach and with venturecapital.org, and you could give your younger self some advice, what would that advice be?
That advice would be to really focus on something. When I say that, I mean, focus on creating a business that makes me so excited inside that I just can't not do it. And it's not about making money. It really is about changing the human condition. And if I could have focused on that early on and forgotten about the money, but focused on changing the world for the better, whether it's through a product, a company, or whatever it is, I would have been more successful. And I believe that with all of my heart. And I hope that people who see a dream in their heart, you don't see a dream with your eyes, you see a dream with your heart. When you see that dream in your heart, I hope that you'll contact our cooperative venturing network here in Northwest Arkansas and join us so that we can help that become a reality in today's world and change the human condition as a result.
That's pretty strong. And what's the best way for people to find you and to follow what you're doing? What's the best way for them to learn more about what you're up to?
Well, I'm not up to anything on my own. I think I'm going to be up to it with Startup Junkies. And I hope that they can contact Startup Junkies, and I'll just be a very small part of the amazing things that you've already accomplished.
We'll make that happen.
Welcome
Lynn,
to the team.
Yeah, thanks so
Thank
much
you.
for we're glad you're in Northwest Arkansas and the wealth of experience that you're going to bring. And all I would say to all our listeners is expect to hear more from Lynn. We're really glad you're in the neighborhood, and we're going to do some great things together.
I'm excited about it.
All right. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.